to the ground of the New South by women who are strong, flawed, able, and resilient. Raised in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Friedman is an assistant professor of English creative writing at the University of Southern Mississippi, where she holds the title of Nina Bell Suggs Endowed Professor. So let's welcome Olivia Clare Friedman.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. How are you? Good. Can you hear me okay? Okay. I know I'm a little on the short side, so hopefully everything's okay with the microphone and all that. I'm really, really happy to be here. This is an incredible experience. Just to, you know, the community alone and being together and talking about writing with the students, talking about writing with the fellow writers, and, you know, even the conversations that we have as we're walking from one building to another. I mean, that's what these things are about, you know, and I don't mean to be kind of corny about it, but it's true. And these things are incredibly special. And so I feel very, very honored to be here and echo everyone's thanks and praise of Kendall and the W for putting this on and for recognizing writers in this way and bringing us all together like this. So thank you so, so much. I'm going to read a bit from my novel, Here Lies, which came out in March of this year. And it's always a funny thing to read from a novel, kind of choosing, you know, where you're going to read from so that things feel whole, but are also kind of representing the novel, but also not giving things away. So I have 3 parts from the novel that I'm going to read. And one is the very beginning, and then one's kind of more towards the middle and one's more towards the end, but nothing gives anything away. It's funny for me to talk about a novel that I wrote that way. I started out as a poet, and I'm still a poet. And then I came out with a story collection, and now I have this novel. But I never thought that I would write a novel where there's a lot happening in terms of the plot, you know, because I'm so sentence driven that I always thought that the plot was something that I kind of thought about last. But then I ended up writing a book that has a lot of plot to it. So there are like real kind of spoilers, as they say. And that was a surprise, but it was a really wonderful surprise. So there's a lot that happens in the book. But the premise of the book is that we're in Louisiana in 2042. And I was raised in Louisiana, not in 2042, but I was raised in Louisiana in Baton Rouge. And this is an alternate future in 2042. And in this alternate future, burials have been banned by the government. You cannot bury the deceased because of effects from climate disaster, from climate change. And so land is precious. Cremation is now mandatory. So that's the premise that we start with in this novel. And we follow Alma, who's a young woman whose mother recently passed away, and her mother's wish was to be buried, and Alma was not able to honor that wish. But now the government has her mother's urns of cremated ashes. And so Alma's trying to get those ashes back. So she's spending this first part of the novel kind of finding how she can do that and also work with her grief. This novel is very much about working through grief, but it's also about hope. It's a lot about hope and all the different parts of grief. So I'll read a little bit from the first chapter here. And Alma is meeting Bordelon in a public library. I love writing about public libraries. I'm working on something now, and of course I'm setting a lot of it again in a public library. So I love writing about libraries. So They meet each other and they're not too sure about each other. This chapter is called Before. From before I began, I loved her. This was what I knew. Before the beginning, before I was born from her, before bones and blood and body, before egg. My mother, Naomi, was dead and not buried. Dead, in fact, for half a year. Her body burned to ashes by the state. Bones, heart, feet, eyes burned to dust against her wish, against mine. And that was that. I was trying to understand. I was at the library for the first time since she died, upstairs on the second floor. The air was muggy and dim. I zoomed between empty carrels toward the faraway corner, a place I used to call my own, a row of 3 computers. Here, I could be alone. No one, not for years, seemed to know the spot. To my right were shelves of hardbacks, amber and green, the color of jewels. To my left, out the smudged picture window, I could watch the sun-sopped field of weeds and goldenrod shake in the wind, feel my own insides shake in an answer. I walked to the spot, heard my own breathing. I reached the corner and stopped. In front of me, a girl sat at one of the keyboards, hunched and glum. She'd been squinting into the screen when she heard me and glanced up. A burst of hazel gold eyes, silky blue eyeshadow. She said nothing, went back to her screen. I said nothing too. How long had she been coming? I wanted to make her get up, shove her chair, force her to leave. That was what the mean-hearted me would do, or the bold-hearted me. And sometimes I allowed my dolty-dolt heart these fantasies. All I wanted was peace. I wanted to do what I needed to do alone. I told her, go away in my head, get gone, get gone. I sat down on the other end, left a computer station between us and logged myself in. The girl clicked and typed and clicked. Her fingernails were painted a clean, frosty blue. She breathed through her mouth, loud puffs of air, and she put a foot up on the chair, adjusted a pink sparkling flip-flop, the kind you see in the drugstore aisle, with Water Baby's sunscreen and inflatable beach balls. She scratched her naked toes. They have computers downstairs, I told her. Downstairs, they go faster. She looked at her screen. These are dinosaurs, I said. You can't even watch a movie. I hit the back of the monitor hard, as though it weren't working, as that would show how feeble it was, but it was working just fine. I know that already, she said. I glimpsed her screen. She was speed scrolling through pictures and paragraphs of gossip about TV stars and blog celebrities and Hollywood he said, she said heartbreaks. She looked younger than me, but near enough to my age, give or take, and I was 22. I said, downstairs, the AC won't blow on you. I'm not cold, she said. I said, downstairs, the librarian sneaks you free Cokes. I'm not thirsty, she said. I'm going to skip a little ahead in this chapter towards the end. And as you might imagine, Alma and Bordelon start getting along a little bit. But, you know, thinking about their dialogue and this kind of arguing that's happening in their dialogue is part of what brought me to the characters so well too. You know, sometimes it's that dialogue that can really kind of bring them out. And what they've discovered as they talk a little more is that they've both experienced big loss in their life. And so they start kind of bonding over that. She was taller than me, not difficult, with me hardly over 5 feet, with very ordinary blue eyes, very ordinary brown hair, very ordinary small teeth. There was nothing humdrum, ho-hum about her. She was one of the most beautiful people I had ever seen. I didn't know why I said this then, but I did. What was your grandmother's name? I thought she'd tell me to leave the subject alone, yet without even taking a breath, she said, Beatrice. Beatrice, the name of someone no longer with us. I liked thinking of my own mother's name, Naomi, Naomi. For now I could only hold the word in my head, never speak it aloud. It was like the syllables of a spell. Naomi, the name had shock and thrum. Beatrice, I repeated. I leaned on my car and Bordelon looked down. Just like that, 2 tears fell from her eyes to the ground. I thought of the girl in the fairy tale whose tears turned to seeds, to sprouts, to flowers. We said nothing for a minute, just stood. Silence was as near to us as a third person. Something I'd started to know was this: grief was a string that held people together. I don't really need to be alone up there, I said. It's not like I own the second floor. I get it, she said. She was looking down, letting her eyes search the ground. I'm always alone, I said. Maybe too much. I like the company. She looked at me finally, her lids and lashes damp. I had no tissue. I won't watch what you're doing, she said. I never do. Turn up your music. I don't care. She sniffled and smiled, rubbed snot from her nose with the back of her hand, her chipped blue fingernails. I heard thunder, raised my eyes to the lightning crazing the clouds. I was ready for rain to follow, but this time it didn't come. It was August. Any mild or mean weather could and would arrive. I took out my phone, put on music, something sulky and punk from the 90s. I had a 6-pack litter of Abitas in my back seat. We sat on the trunk of my car and started in on those. It would be light for hours. I looked at her face every chance I could. Her smooth forehead, her eyes gone to clear gold in the light. Her hair long and dark and frayed. I gave in. We both had another beer and another and another, and the night cooled and flickered and zoomed. So that's the end of the first chapter. And you'll notice it's August there. And I was thinking about what Steve said last night about, how you realized a lot of your novels were in this particular period and were kind of arranged around football season, you realized. And I find that when I can kind of set what month I'm starting in, like this is Louisiana August, which is this very particular feeling, of heat and humidity, which we have all the time, of course, but it's very particular in August. When I have that feeling, that atmosphere to it, it allowed a lot of the story to come. And I was telling one of the some of the students yesterday, this novel went through a lot of different drafts, but one of the things, or I think really the thing that stayed the same, was the setting, was Louisiana starting in August. And so there's, and then in the novel, we end in January. So that really kind of helped me structure the book and frame the book thinking about it that way. I have a new novel right now that I'm starting in June, and I'll take it through fall and winter. So I'll read a little bit from another chapter here, kind of towards the middle, and this is more of Bordelon and Alma again. And this chapter is called Baucis and Philemon, who are 2 figures from Greek mythology. And Naomi, you remember, is Alma's mother's name, and the name of the storm that they're in right now is called Miranda. So fascinating how we name storms, right? How we name hurricanes. So I have a lot of named storms in here too. Bordelon sat silent and still, staring ahead at the library as if waiting for the storm to bear down, almost watching Bordelon in her car in the parking lot of the library with this storm coming. Without thinking, I revved and pulled into the lot, parked beside her. She turned and saw me, took off her sunglasses and started as though she'd been startled out of a waking dream. I left my engine running, ran to her car's passenger side in the biting rain. She leaned over and pulled the door handle to let me in. "What are you doing?" she said. I scrambled into her car, bringing Rain from Miranda in with me. "Close it," Bordelon said. I slammed the door shut, wrung out Rain from the ends of my hair. Her back seat overflowed with clothes and flip-flops and loose papers and high heels and burger wrappers and Sprite cans. I saw a curling iron, an old hot pink caboodle, some framed photos stacked in the footwells. I pointed to the caboodle. "Where'd you get this?" I said. "You even know what it is?" she said. "My mother had one," I said. "Don't know where that thing is now." "This was my mother's too," said Bordelon. "Where's she?" I said. "I don't know." "Don't say you're sorry." I wasn't going to. Her face turned into a child's face, a complete drawn sadness. Her blue eyeshadow had faded and powdered on her lids. I didn't want to ask her about my own mother because that was the beginning of all the things I didn't want to say aloud. But she asked me nothing. She looked ahead to the storm, clouds graying the light, rain blurring the arched windows of the library. "What are you doing here?" I said. "I don't know." I waited, but that was all she was going to tell me. "You have somewhere to go?" I was asking too much. She didn't even answer. She watched Miranda, a challenge. Come on and get me. Her eyes didn't blink. Seeing her face, it came to me that she needed me there for a few reasons I knew and others I didn't yet know. The world had orphaned us both. "Come over," I said. I surprised even myself saying that. "Come to my place." "I'm fine right here," she said. "Library opens soon." "Not for hours," I said. 2 hours, she said. 2. "By then, Miranda will eat you up." "I'll drive you to my place," I said. "Leave your car." "I don't want to go anywhere," she said, "and I sure as hell don't want to leave my car." "It'll be here when you get back." "You don't want me with you," she said. "I do," I said, "and I've got beer." That was what did it, turned her mind. She picked up her bag and we ran outside, ducked into my car, the rain pawing and clawing our heads. She watched her hatchback through the window as we drove away, like it was a dear friend she was leaving. She kept her eyes on it until we were out of sight. "It's not going anywhere," I said. I thought we'd talk on the short way back to the house. Miranda was picking up speed and I put on the Carpenters, but Bordelon reclined her seat and closed her eyes, hugged her purse to her chest. I wanted to rock and skid with the pooling rain in the road, show her my thrills and tricks. Instead, I drove close and slow, creeping along in the storm, not wanting to stir or wake her. I smelled asters and wild carrot in the rain, felt heat on my arms and palms, itching my scalp and ears, heat touching my brain humming along, and me singing to myself as if I talked to the world or the world talked to me, but my mother would tell me that's God. So now I'm going to read the third section that I'm going to read, and then I'll be done after that and happy to talk with you more with any questions you might have. And this next part that I'm going to read, Alma has met a few different people, including Bordelon and a really irreverent librarian who helps her, and just this kind of found family among these women, these friendships that take place between these women, and that's what brings for Alma so much of the hope of the story, because she really kind of isolated herself in her grief after her mother died. And I've had the question before about COVID, writing about grief from loved ones, losing loved ones in COVID, and also the isolation of COVID. And I was absolutely writing this novel during that time and isolated during that time. There were other drafts of this novel that I wrote before COVID, but the heart of what became this novel I was writing during that time. And so much of my thinking about writing about grief and mourning and public rituals of mourning, the choices that we have and some that were taken away from us in terms of public rituals of mourning. I was thinking about all of this while I was writing this book, and lost someone very, very dear to me during that time, as so many of us did. And then I was also a new mother during that time. And so I had that can feel kind of, there's great community in that, but I was also feeling kind of isolated, with that during the pandemic as well. So part of this writing comes from me thinking through all of that and trying to have a kind of conversation about grief and coming out on the other side of it and what happens on the other side, what that feels like. And so for this book, for these characters, part of the answer to that is the natural world and returning to the natural world. And so Alma meets Josephine, who gardens, and Alma and Josephine start gardening together, and Alma finds great strength in this. And then I'll end this section by just reading this description of Alma drawing a portrait of her mother. We began with the weeds, rank and wild. They were knotted in great clumps all around, the seedlings and sprouts. I let the weeds grow, said Josephine. She pulled on her gloves, tugged the brim of her Tabasco cap low on her head, and knelt down. We'll get them, she said, but leave some in there. I always leave some in. I didn't ask why. I knew at least one reason. They were weeds, but delicate. Weeds, but pretty and spangled with color, star-shaped. Tiny blooms lolled on their stems. What was the difference between weed and flower? These weeds tangled and rolled like shapes of green brains and briar. She reached out, gripped a long stem by its neck. She yanked, tearing the weed straight from the soil. If the weed could have screamed, I believe it would have. She moved onto the head of a snarled weed clump, ripped the bunch from the ground with a single snap. I could hear them break from the earth. Come on, she said, help me. She didn't look up. She moved to the next batch, steadying herself on her knees, ready to rip the sleek stems. Come, she said. I knelt beside her, chose a weed bunch, wrapped my hand there as if to strangle, and I strangled. I pulled up, I tore, their roots like a thick nest, their leaves warm and bristled. We discarded to the right, moved to the left, pulled and grabbed and snatched and seized. I pretended my hand was a mouth, and down the mouth came, open and ready, biting each weed from the ground. To pray, said Josephine, is to hope, to ask and wonder. What do you want to ask? She didn't look up. She tore at a tough stem violently. You don't have to say it out loud. You can ask without using words. I said nothing. It was as though I were asking something of the world without exactly knowing the words or what it was. A tendril of moss wormed its gray way around a flowering weed. At the center of the petals, the heart of the flower sat like a gold eye. I almost left it there. But the garden sprouts were overrun, would need to grow. I snapped the head of the flower clean from the stem. Josephine stopped, looked to me. Good, she said. Very good. Keep going now. Keep asking. I sat on my knees, pulled back my hair with a rubber band. I scratched my nose with the heel of my hand. The pinwheel was right there, turning in the hot wind. I bent back down to work beside Josephine. I was asking, weeding, ripping, feeling my asking becoming a new thing, becoming anger. I moved farther. I moved faster. My hands clearing, attacking. Sprouts from the seeds we planted were more and more visible, like stars, opening, brightening. I clawed and shredded, bursting, splitting the stems. And then, without thinking, I bent down to the ground, opened my mouth, bit the pink flowering head of a weed from its stem with my teeth. I tasted earth. I tongued and teethed the texture of petal and bloom and soft lips. Josephine turned, watched me as I chewed the flower. She opened her mouth wide and laughed, the scar above her lip trembling, a full-hearted laugh, the best I'd ever heard. I swallowed the flower. I buried it in my body. "Come with me," said Josephine. She stood with some difficulty, her knees crackling. She went to a little table she kept in the yard and picked up 2 garden spades. She handed one to me, bronzed with rust, the shape of a tongue. She led me to the edge of the yard, to a tree stump striped with beads of fungus. She held her spade up over her head. Then in a blur, she brought the spade down on the stump with a solid clang. "Holy shit," I said. "It's good for you," she said, wiping sweat from the back of her neck. "Releases energy." She brought her spade up again, hit the tree stump square on the bulbs of fungus. "Go to it," she told me. "Hit as much as you want. You could break the shovel." "Nevertheless," she said. She brought up her spade, hit the stump with an even stronger blow. "I do it all the time." She gave another hit, letting out a tremendous breath. "All the time," she told me. "Go to it." I raised my spade in the air, opened my eyes wide, gave a short yell. I brought the spade down, clanging it on the stump, the sound of the hit soaring, loud and clean. I was home before dusk. The sky stung with deep pink. In my mother's room, at the sagging center of the bed, I sat with my dull graphite pencil, my drawing pad laid on my crossed knees. Here was the crest of her forehead, her eyes flecked with light, the bare tree of veins at her temple. I kept a rhythm, my pencil barely lifting, a song to the sound of the lead across paper, the jaw that softly V'd to her chin. I was drawing my mother's face from memory. My best photo of her was still in my leather portfolio on the floor of my room. To myself, I called the photo the pearl-eyed picture. Her face was only half in frame, cut off at the edge. There was the framed wave of her hair, a delicate ear, and one blue pearled eye. I took it out only rarely. I could never look at it long. You could not simply sit and stare at a book of spells. I'll end there. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
I'm really curious to know about how you did the world building for a novel set 20 years in the future. We had a really interesting discussion in our course about this, about how do you imagine a world 20 years from now? You know, what was your process? Did you brainstorm? Did you research? And what did that look like?
Yeah, thanks for that great question. And we were talking about this a little bit at lunch too, like this idea of, a friend of mine calls it a kind of tilted world, where it's the world as you know it, but you just kind of take it and go like that. And I tend to, that's what I tend to like to write. Even when I try to avoid that, I tend to kind of go back to it. I maybe because my head is slightly that way, I guess, but for this particular book, when I was working on a different draft of this book, but what was happening, and I'm coming to your question, I promise, but this is part of it. What was happening was that I was working on a short story at the same time with this premise, and I found that as I was working on the novel, I kept kind of going back to the story to work on the story, and I was like, what's happening? Why am I have this big novel I'm working on, I need to work on it, but I keep returning to the story. And I realized that was where my heart was, that was what I really wanted to write about, was something with this premise. And so, but whenever you have an idea like this that feels like a big idea, for me, I wanted to center it. I wanted to focus it through the characters. So finding Alma, and then I was talking about this with students earlier too, finding her first person voice really got me into the world. That really helped me with the world building. Originally, this novel was in third person, and I liked it in third person a lot. But there was something that happened when I opened it up to first that allowed me to find Alma's voice and the world at the same time. It was important to me, though, that, we were in the not too distant future, and that it was an alternate future. And I didn't want technology to have gone very far. I didn't want flying cars, and I didn't, that's not what I was focused on. It was more what was creating the premise of this novel, and climate change, creating that tension, and as the backdrop of the novel. And so, but I have references to like Back to the Future too, and I have references to old sitcoms and things, because I still wanted it to be kind of grounded. And I watch sitcoms from a long time ago now. So I wanted some of that to kind of ground us, even though we were in this different world. So I wanted those things to be really subtle. And I wanted the humanness of it to come forward.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You mentioned you loved writing about libraries, and my favorite character in the book was the public librarian. Did you have any real life inspirations or literary inspirations for that character?
Yeah, thanks for that great question. And a lot of people, I love the librarian in this book because she just really misbehaves. I mean, she's just like, she's quoting Shakespeare, but she's, like drinking after hours in the library and helping Alma, write this letter that she needs to write to get through the bureaucracy of government, and so she just like real. So her dialogue is really weird because it's like textured with Shakespeare and Southern idiom and just, all kinds of things. And I love her. And but it also got me thinking about how much I love characters who misbehave, and just characters who, like, whatever that means for them, like if you're in a library, that means talking loudly. I remember one time when I was at the library with my it wasn't my baby, it was a friend's baby, but suddenly they just like burst out sobbing and weeping in the middle of the library because they didn't know, and everyone's looking at it. It's like, you do not do that, and we all know that, but I love thinking about like what would be totally that thing. What is, yelling out in the library? What does that look like? I don't do that in life, but I think maybe that's partly why I love to write about it. And so right now I'm actually writing a new novel that has these characters that are just like, they're breaking out, they're just like misbehaving in all kinds of ways. And so I loved writing her for that reason. And at the same time, like she's devoted to books, you know, and she's devoted to what she's doing. So that's where that character really came from. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. It was real pleasure.
Okay, so our second presenter is Chantal James. Chantal James lives in Washington, D.C. and has been published across genres as poet, fiction writer, essayist, and book reviewer in such venues as Catapult, Pace Magazine, Harvard's Transition Magazine, The Bitter Southerner, and more. Chantal's honors include a Fulbright Fellowship in Creative Writing to Morocco and a finalist position for the Alex Albright Creative Nonfiction Prize from the North Carolina Literary Review for 2019. Her work includes the following: Life in DC Between Homeland and Diaspora, and The World Loses Its Former Shape, Caught in the Undertow of Grief, both published in 2018 in Catapult. In her debut novel, None But the Righteous, published in 2022 from Counterpoint Press, a young man is set adrift after Hurricane Katrina and journeys across the country in search of something, himself, home, otherwise. Of the work, Margaret Wilkerson Sexton proclaims, None But the Righteous is an homage to post-colonial and Southern literature, and yet is singularly incandescent of a marvel. Debbie Lasker writes, in the tradition of Toni Morrison's beloved, None But the Righteous is a gripping ghost story, a fevered dream of a young man's quest for freedom and belonging in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. Chantal James has written a gorgeous page turner. So please let's welcome Ms. James to the.
Okay, so we have another diminutive writer standing behind this podium. And I'm going to set my timer for 27 minutes because I decided I was going to read for 27 minutes. First off, I really have to start by reiterating everyone else's thanks for this opportunity because it's really amazing to be here. I consider myself a Southerner. I was raised in North Carolina, although I now live in Washington, D.C. And my novel is really what I considered to be a pan-Southern novel because it does take place across various parts of the South. So I'm always very honored and excited to connect with people who live in all parts of the Southern US around this novel because that's really who it's for. I wanted us to see ourselves in it. So that's one of the reasons why I'm really beyond honored to have the opportunity to be here and get to fellowship with not only the writers, but each and every one of you who came out today. Just very briefly to provide some context for what I'm going to read. I'll provide just a brief note that this is narrated by an actual historical figure who was a mulatto friar who lived in Lima, Peru during the 1500s, who was canonized by the Catholic Church after his death. And he, in New Orleans, voodoo is syncretized with the Loa Papalegba, who is like the guardian of the crossroads and the openings between, you know, the thresholds between things and things like that. So that was part of my sort of connection to him. And I thought I would read just straight from the beginning of my book and stop when my timer goes off because I see a novel as sort of like a sustained spell or like incantation where like you're really trying to draw somebody in and conjure this world for them that feels real for them. And the opening is where I wanted to establish that in a strong a way as I could. So I thought, why not begin there and just give you all an idea of, for those of you who haven't read it, an idea of what you would encounter were you to read this book. So I'll begin. 1, in which Ham finds alternate homes. When I get so lonesome for the life of the body that the thinnest slice of it will do, I start answering to names that might not otherwise turn my head. Thirsting for the earthly body, I might even stoop to drink liquor left at the crossroads for hoodoo gods. So happy to be bound up again in the cares of the flesh that I hardly care whose flesh it is. May Ham never wander far enough to know this. His body sits on a bus. His mind wanders back to wonder why he never had a place in Atlanta. One morning in Atlanta, a place growing further in time and space behind him by the moment, while he shuttles ever homeward on a bus with many others, Ham drifted out onto the porch of Mayfly's duplex to have his coffee and view the world through the steam that rose over the brim of the cup. He and I watched eerie yellows spread stain-like over each tree in view, turning the street golden as the early sun poured over it. If he squinted, Ham could see to where the strip of houses ended on one side at the parking lot of Yassine's Fish. A small figure made its way toward him from that direction, crossing under the metal signpost that held Yassine's marquee high above the waking world. The figure drew closer to Ham, growing in size through the rippled air above his coffee cup until he could see its female form, a young woman in a hoodie, walking a bicycle alongside her. Before long, he could hear the click of the revolutions of the wheels, and then he could make out Mayfly's furrowed, concentrated expression. He could see the bunch of tough-looking plants with small purple flowers that she gripped against the bicycle's handlebars. A few yards away from him, she noticed the vapor that ascended from his cup, and connecting the cup to the hand that held it, to the shape that could belong to no one but Ham at this hour, she waved brightly. By the time she'd reached the bottom of the porch stairs, she'd broken into a smile. Good morning. She had been around the block to gather a few plants from a neighbor's garden to transplant for her own use. Ham smelled them before he could eye them up close. When the scent hit him, lavender, he seemed split for a moment into two, leaping out of himself. Next thing he could remember, he was in the living room with Mayfly, in the middle of a conversation with her. He heard the words come out of him. He followed these words. He entered them and was at one with himself again. The scent of lavender sends Ham jumping out of his body. The smell of the soap Father Mon must have used long ago, impressed in his deepest fibers, the smell that cleaved like a film to the man's skin. The smell Ham could never wash off himself, that memory sends in a vapor from his own pores when he least suspects. I think I watch Ham so closely because he knows so well what it is to vacate the body. He has learned how to escape himself, a lesson that death offers freely, but that only a privileged, burdened few can grasp before then. I can tell you that as easily as Ham drifts off to undiscovered worlds when this one is too strange to bear, I could drift, even in life. I could split my body in two. My body could be touched, seen, heard in two places at once, appear in deserts across the ocean as solidly as in my hometown, that ancient city peopled by indigenous ghosts. But that is another story for another hour. For now, it suffices that Ham and the rest of the road jostled weary rattle on, shaken from sleeper nostalgia to the same jarring rhythm as the tires of this bus traveling away from Atlanta impact a road in disrepair. Ham's seat partner is a little girl, her fat braids bound by barrettes in the shape of bright plastic globes. Her mother and a brother occupy the row ahead, the mother fanning herself with a magazine. Now and then, a puff of air she has stirred floats back to Ham, whose sticky skin receives it gratefully. Fields of cotton roll past the window, flecks of cloud white hidden in dark brambles spread and tumbling before an open sky. Down from Atlanta, the world heats itself slowly. Winter saws off like old skin. The thin air thickens. Time begins to draw itself out, each second pulled fuller than the last. His seatmate eats from a bag of cheese puffs, and the sound they make as they are crushed between their tiny teeth turns Ham's head toward her. This inspires the child to offer him some of her snack with fingers coated in a neon orange powder that adheres steadfastly to her skin, staining it. Ham declines. He slides his palm to the back of his neck, to the tender knot there. He has been sleeping on it badly for so long, on a sofa or a floor at Mayfly's house, where he'd finally managed to arrive at the end of so many dreamlike days after the hurricane, days when it seemed that from sun up, he crawled over rocky ground on hands and knees, stumbled until he found somewhere to lay down again by night. The age gap of 8 years between him and Mayfly seemed to have narrowed between the time that had passed since they'd last seen each other until he washed up at her door in Atlanta, storm-swept. Ham's words had whistled over the top of Mayfly's head when she met him at her door, and as they'd settled onto opposite ends of her stained yellow sofa, it was as equals, with an ease that belied the 7 years since they'd last been in the same room. He'd found her with shorn hair. He remembered Mayfly's hair as a chaotic mass of half dreads and abandoned knots. It had been a world, that head of hair, with its own ecosystem. A crumb would fall from it, then an insect. Now it lay curled so close to the scalp that the skin showed through. There were other changes. She no longer rode trains. She no longer scavenged for food and clothes in dumpsters, no longer took up residence in abandoned buildings where the figures of the other people squatting there might appear as phantoms around a corner, where the floorboards of the story above creaked as easily from imagined footsteps as from real ones. She now paid rent every month to live in one half of a slightly rundown duplex on a green and shady street, and she went to work 5 days a week at a call center, soliciting the unsuspecting in the most measured and mellow and courteous of voices, breaking her smooth, deliberate calm only to cuss back at those who cussed her on calls, and then only barely, so that the shock of the raging expletives delivered in such a controlled tone stayed all day with those on the other end of the line. Half the changes in her, maybe more than half, Ham could not measure. He couldn't observe her from any kind of fixed perspective. He wasn't the little boy he had been when they left off, nor was she the taller teenager, and he could not return to a younger form any more than she could. So he wondered if maybe she was only a yardstick by which to measure his own progression. He was useless at coming to these kinds of conclusions. The child in the seat at his side now draws a deep breath, exactly what Ham feels like doing, and he takes vicarious relief from it. Beyond the highway, through the window, Ham sees the ragged half of a near demolished building, its front torn off as if by a giant's fingers. It looks like a dollhouse, its walls cut away to reveal desks, chairs, doorways with miniature doors fluttering in them, half hallways. Ham's mind's eye, and mine, begins to arrange doll people inside it, to conjure ghostly doll lives for them. In Atlanta, Ham was not nursed. Maybe he'd been hoping for someone to patch up his new wounds, help bridge the canyons that trauma had raised in him when the storm had so brutally severed him from all he'd known. He certainly didn't find that in Atlanta, but he had, in those weeks, recovered some necessary habits. The habit of waking in the same room every morning, a room whose every detail was reassuring. The habit of knowing that if he was hungry, there was food in the refrigerator. The habit of seeing once or twice a day a face he had known for years. Mayfly did not seem to have many friends, but Ham had met a few of them. One young man, Mayfly's age, with a face so beautiful Ham ached to look at it, the same piercing ache of a cavity as hard candy dissolves to nothing in the mouth. A couple of women, each coming alone to sit and talk. They were a generation or two older than Mayfly and Ham, who were still at the beginning of adulthood. Mayfly kept a garden in pots on her porch, some herbs for cooking and some marigolds and some heliotrope. She watered these every day. She had a beautiful waxy orchid growing in a pot in her kitchen, and she would come to stroke its branches now and then as she moved around the house. She had a canary in a cage in the kitchen whose sharp little peeps lent the same quality to the space as a ticking clock or a fire alarm that chirped in need of a new battery. Ham didn't feel like a burden. He knew that Mayfly didn't expect him to stay forever, but that she would have been indifferent if he had. She would have continued to see about him in her perfunctory way, watering him like she watered her plants, feeding him at her table, the same way she dropped seeds into a plastic cup for the bird. And in truth, Ham would not have asked for any better treatment than to be taken as part of the usual landscape. It was better than being handled as a curiosity or a tragedy. The only mission he really had was to find some sugar cane for me so he could gnaw the sweet juice from its fibers and keep my voice near. He feels these urges come from beyond him, urges he knows are not his urges, but my urges, the urges whose satisfaction allow him to escape himself in the ways he needs to when the world closes in. He found some one day at a shop owned by some West Africans in the neighborhood. Mayfly hardly asked him any questions about himself the first week, until one rare evening when Ham was not wandering the streets like a walking dead man, feeling completely apart from the world of the living faces he passed, when she was not out somewhere Ham was not invited. An evening storm had trapped them together in the house, like two insects under the dome of an overturned sugar bowl, and they sat together, listening to rain beat at the window, watching it cast underwater shadows on the living room's blue walls. Mayfly shuffled a deck of cards in her hands, not having yet announced what game they were playing, and as she turned to him and parted her lips, he thought she would ask, "Gin rummy or spit?" Instead, she said, "Did you leave much behind?" The rain's patter could sometimes be mistaken for the rattle of cicadas. Both sounds rose into the air like scent and hung there. Ham wanted to say everything, but what he said was, "Not much. I just started working on a fishing boat." He thought of the lake's waters and how abundant they were at their best, how provident and merciful and full of life. What fish? Grouper and trout. The man who owned the boat was from around here, a man who'd grown up landlocked, whose boyhood nose had itched for breezes cast off an ocean, or failing that, a good, broad, muddy river, or at the very least, a reservoir vast enough that he couldn't see to its other shore. You lived on your own? I'm not a kid, Ham insisted, as though it answered the question. Mayfly had the posture of someone who gave nothing away, no matter what she searched out and found in the world. If Ham assumed this stance was something new in her, something that had developed after they'd parted, a second look would have proved otherwise. This was something that had always been with her before she had given up traveling, this unwillingness to yield. It was the same quality that had allowed her to perch atop swift-moving freight trains in the rush of night among strangers who concealed who knew what knives and what rage. It was the dark of night itself, her cloak. Ham was always granted a peek beneath it, and now he turned the hard edge of interrogation toward her to ask abruptly, "How did you feel when you cut your hair?" Mayfly smiled at the question. "At first I felt like a boy," she said. "Then I felt so light and so cool. It's like years and years falling down at your feet, like being free from history. And I keep it this way because it makes me feel free." "I can see that," said Ham, because agreeing was easy. But his own hair was the same length, and he didn't particularly see any freedom in it. These were ways of each beginning to ask the other, "How did you get here?" But there was no neat summary in answer to that question. Here was one reason Mayfly tended to keep in touch so poorly with folks who were no longer part of her daily routine. There was always the dilemma of how to sum herself up, how to explain everywhere she'd been, and how to explain everyone she'd been since the last point of contact. They'd each kept moving along their separate trajectories, always intending to join back on occasion, since the night 7 years ago, when Ham had stood with his heels dug into the gravel of the train yard and watched Mayfly swing up onto the boxcar, watched her disappear away into the train's thin line to join the horizon and its necklace of far-off lights. Ham had missed her sometimes. He thought of her the following year when summer swelled up again. He thought of her sometimes when riding the streetcar in St. Charles, when air thick as cake and redolent with honeysuckle pushed through the slits in the window next to his seat. He thought of her when he saw punk kids begging in the quarter, sometimes thought of her at the strong smell of an unwashed body. He thought of her when he switched schools, thought of her when Father Mon transferred parishes and was replaced by a pot-bellied priest from South America. Thought he saw her in a stranger sometimes, the same way he still searched every crowd for faces that looked like his own, draping the bodies of strangers with the costumes of his imagined cousins and half-siblings and great-aunts. The longing found an easy home in him. The bus halts into a gas station and it heaves to a stop. They're some 40 miles from Morrisville. The station's rafters, lit in blue-white fluorescence, cast an artificial day against the darkening skies. The bus passengers file out, and Ham's young seatmate doesn't seem to mind when he places his palm at the top of her head to steady himself, his senses dazed, confused that the ground beneath him no longer moves. The 30 or so strangers, not so strange to one another as they'd been a few hours ago, and with less regard for the boundaries between their bodies, shuffled their rubber soles against the rubber of the aisle. Ham files out too, feeling it in his shoulders when he jerks down to take the first step at the doorway. He can see into the window of the convenience store where his seatmate's brother is pushing a dollar bill, worn to the texture of cloth, beneath the shield of transparent plastic that protects the cashier from the menace of the boy's burgeoning manhood, from his child's sour milk breath. When he left Mooresville, Alabama a month ago, Alabama where the bus now cools, Alabama which was never his home but only a temporary refuge, where a girl named Deborah had tried her best to penetrate the numbness that had overtaken him to the soul, not knowing, as he still doesn't know, that his own child was breathing underwater like a fish in her belly, a real relative, not the imagined ones he has known. It was because he had sought Mayfly. He had spent a strange week staying with Deborah's family after the hurricane blasted him from his hometown, moving through their house under the weight of the possibility that all he had ever known had been destroyed. To escape, he had sent an email to an old address and received by chance a response. He had dialed the number she included, and when he'd heard her voice, he'd come up in a carpool with others bound for various destinations in the city of Atlanta. He was dropped off a few blocks away from her place at a desolate strip mall. He'd switched 2 digits in her street number. You know, Mayfly had said as the night pulled around them and the rain slowed, I wanted to be an orphan too. She was thinking of the mud that was rising to gather around her bicycle's tires outside, and what a mess she would get into trying to free them from the sludge the next day. Is that why you followed me home that time, to Miss Pearl's table? Because we were 2 orphans to my mind. I was a runaway, a fugitive, excited by the idea that something was always on my trail, that it would catch up to me. No one was chasing you, Ham said. No, she had to agree. That would have been more fun, right? I don't know, Ham said, but I felt like we needed to look out for each other. Well, Ham said, nobody looks out for me. It was both a boast and a lament. They were not being chased by the same things, he wanted to say, certainly not now, and they never had been. She said, don't trust me. What? I could be here 1 minute, gone the next. Ham didn't know what to make of it, but he filed it away with the other curious things. And as they both turned inward, shaken by the dance of speaking to each other without saying anything, saying things to each other without speaking, lulled by the drone of the rain against the house's sides, they nodded to sleep, first Ham and then Mayfly. That night on the sofa, both Ham and Mayfly had the same dream. They wandered a city at twilight, both of them children of the same age and size, until they came to the backyard of Miss Pearl's old shotgun house, a meadow of overgrown weeds and fruit. Hairy moths beat their wings against the stoop light shining like a beacon, and Ham and Mayfly were as attracted as the insects to the false moon. Sleeping Ham and waking Ham both want to know if Miss Pearl is alive or dead. They both want to know if she's been swallowed by the raging lake that broke its bounds when the hurricane came in and spilled the contents of the ocean over the land. Sleeping Ham, much more strongly and achingly than waking Ham, would have me drudge the murky waters of the underworld for her, count every pleading face in heaven and hell and all the ones on earth. Waking Ham feels this most often as an indistinct and unnamed malaise, or sometimes like the phantom pain of a limb severed long ago. In their shared dream, the back door was wide open, and they looked on inside the bright yellow picture framed by the doorway as I set the table, placing glinting butter knives beside spoons with worn wooden handles. I wore my habit, a belt of knotted hemp rope around my waist. Steam rose in plumes from a stove just out of Ham and Mayfly's view, and the only part of Miss Pearl they could make out was the flesh of her elbow, jiggling into and out of sight as she stirred the pot. Some hours later, nighttime was parted like a sea for Ham and Mayfly, anchored head to foot on the sofa, and the sun broke through their dreaming. And yeah, I have 13 seconds left, so I'm gonna stop there. And that's the end. And that was pretty tidy because that was the end of the first chapter too. So anybody who wants to ask me a question, I'm definitely definitely down for that. Sure. Anybody?
I had a question about the voodoo aspect of it, the Louisiana aspect of it. What drew you to that? And because I know you said you were from North Carolina, and what kind of research, like what was your research process for that specific aspect of it, the narrator and the culture of Louisiana and the voodoo culture?
Okay, great. That's an excellent question. Well, one of the people this book is dedicated to is my grandmother, Vivian. And she was a native of New Orleans. And I think she was close to all of her grandchildren, so I don't think it would be fair for me to claim that I was closer to her than any of the others. But I was close to her and she was very dear to me. And she lived in the city from her birth until after she graduated college, because she went to Xavier down there. And so my interest in the culture of that area comes from her. And as far as the voodoo aspect, I drew on people I knew who were actual practitioners of voodoo in my area. And I read a lot of books and did a lot of other of that type of research, just so that I could, contextualize things and feel like I was being true as possible. Always aware that I really wanted to feel like I was doing what I was doing, like kind of with the permission of, hopefully with the permission of the spirits I was calling on, particularly the soul of Saint Martin and the figure of Papa Legba.
So having read, the entire book, I paid attention to, you've created a lot of histories for your characters. And so you have this specific history for the pendant and for Mayfly and for Ham. I was just curious if you had any suggestions when you're writing. I wouldn't call this necessarily a historical novel, but creating histories for your characters, if you had any advice for how you do that, like how you create these cohesive histories for your characters.
Well, I do think it can be useful. I hope I'm giving good advice here because I don't teach creative writing, so I don't necessarily have that expertise in how to convey the bones of it to other people. And I work very instinctually, even though I've had training myself. But I think it's always useful if you keep a little notebook alongside yourself as you're writing, where you can just sort of jot down sketches and impressions of the characters. And you can go for list form. You don't have to use complete sentences, but just to do the work of investigating who they are outside of the actual narrative of the book. But then on the other hand, I do think that's a useful practice that I did utilize while I was drafting this book. But I also have to say that there's really no substitute for getting into the actual narrative and seeing who the characters are when they interact with each other. Because at the end of the day, I really do believe that we know who a character is by the things they say, but when they're interacting with other characters, by the way they behave. If we're lucky enough and the author makes these decisions to give us this window, we know who they are by their thoughts, by what they're thinking. And so I feel like there's really no substitute for getting into the narrative and seeing who the characters reveal themselves to be across the plot. And since you're a writer in an MFA program, I'm sure I'm not the first person to tell you that it's okay for your first draft to be sloppy as you are discovering these kinds of things about your characters. So that's what I would say. Any other questions? Oh, yes, and thank you to everybody.
Okay, we're gonna take a short, maybe 5-minute break before we come back to hear our final speaker and the Ephemera Prize winners. So we'll be back.
Sound check. Sound check. I was just there.
Well, thank you so much. It was amazing to meet you. Yeah. I know. I was like, I'm doing 16 months.
Check 1 2 microphone. Check 1 2. Check 2 microphone. Check 1 2 2. Just about, yeah. We're gonna quickly check the. That's our morning.
Hello again. So if everyone can make their way in, we're just about ready to start. Our third presenter is Jacqueline Allen Trimble. Jacqueline Allen Trimble lives and writes in Montgomery, Alabama. She is a National Endowment for the Arts Creative Writing Fellow of Poetry, a Cave Canem Fellow, and an Alabama State Council on the Arts Literary Fellow. In addition to her academic work, her poetry has appeared in various journals, including Poetry Magazine, the Louisville Review, the Offing, the Rumpus, and Poet Lore, and has also been featured by Poetry Daily and Duke University's Heart Leadership Program. Her work is included in the following anthologies: The Beautiful Poets Reimagined Nation, a collection of visual poems for each U.S. state and traveling exhibit; The Night's Magician, a collection of 80 poems by contemporary writers on the moon, and an essay on writing. A Woman Explains How Learning Poetry is Poetry and Not Magic Made Her a Poet, which appears in Southern Writers on Writing. Essays from 26 contemporary Southern writers. She wrote 5 episodes for Die Testament, a South African soap opera that streamed on Network 24 in fall of 2019, and 8 episodes for the second season, Die Testament 2, which aired in spring 2022. Published by New South Books, American Happiness, her debut poetry collection, won the 2016 Balcones Poetry Prize. The ironically titled book examines America's refusal to grapple with hard truths, preferring instead the pretense that everyone and everything is just fine. Of the work, Honore Jeffers wrote, "I long for her kind of poetry, these cut to the flesh poems, this verse that sings the old time religion of difficult truths with new courage and utter sister beauty. How to Survive the Apocalypse," her second poetry collection, was published by New South Books in August of 2022. Randall Horton writes of the book, "Not since Carolyn Rogers have we heard a voice this bold, buttressed by poetic craft. It's all here. The energy and excitement of Black idiom reimagined as contemporary art, the beautiful defiance of a balled fist disguised as love." Trimble is Professor of English and chairs the Department of Languages and Literature at Alabama State University. So please help me welcome Jacqueline Allen Trimble.
Hey, everybody, how y'all doing? All right, y'all have had a day of amazing writing, and I could listen to this all day. So this is awesome. Okay, so I'm going to start with, is it echo? Okay, I thought it was just my ears. Thank God there's an echo. Is that better? Okay. Whew. You never know. And my book is How to Survive the Apocalypse. So anyway, all right. So I'm gonna actually start. I'm gonna bookend this reading with two new poems, brand new poems. And the first is for Dina. I don't know. Hey, Dina. Okay. So I'm a Cave Canem fellow and I've become a graduate fellow. I had my last Cave Canem retreat this summer and I'm very sad, but very happy. And Frank Walker was one of the professors there. And so I wrote this in his workshop class because he made us stare in a mirror for like 5 minutes to do a selfie. And so a lot of the poems I'll read this afternoon are very heavy. So I thought I'd start with something that's not heavy. By the way, and I'll show it to you, you can probably see it. It's a sentence. I've been working on different weird forms. And so I like to write sentences as poems. And yeah, this is one sentence. Okay. So it's called a sentence. Wait, stop. No, see, the echo messed me up. Thank you, Kendall, for inviting me back. I didn't embarrass myself too much, so apparently not. So thank you. Thank you, the W, for inviting me back, for having me back. Here we go. It's called A Sentence on Being Forgettable. This woman sees me in the grocery store, her face lighting up 1,000 twinkle lights and says, "So glad to see you, Dina." Except that is not my name. Though I do know Dina, and this woman knows me since I ate at her house 2 days ago. And Dina has never eaten at her house, nor do we really look alike, except in that this is a safe Black woman way. But I am not offended, since anonymity is my superpower. And maybe aliens implanted a flashy thing in my eye so that when I blink at people I want to forget me or some out of the way thing I've said or done, I just wipe myself from their minds. Though with her, I had been nothing but delightful, so why would I flash her? And perhaps I do not know my own strength or don't yet have control of my massive power or am forgetting whom I make forget me because this happens to me all the time with a wide spectrum of people. Poets I have interviewed for hours, school friends, neighbors, ex-best friends at the post office, though to be fair, that was probably a little senility. Store clerks who should by now have memorized my shopping habits, let alone my face, yet I do not deny my own culpability, having myself smiled blankly and yelled, "Hey you," way too loud to all those names and faces I have misplaced. Students, acquaintances, friends, cousins, a nephew who I had not, in my defense, seen since he was an arm baby. Even my own children, whose names I often exchange with each other, and the dogs. However, if I wax existential, we are all part of the universe in such a way that each person we encounter is a stranger each time we encounter her, him, them, a creature made new in the absence of our parting, for we have never met that particular them any more than we have ever met ourselves. A discovery I made just the other day when asked by my creative writing professor to hold up a mirror and think about how I have never and will never see my own face for real as other people see it. So maybe I look more like Dina than I think, which is what I thought as I said, "I'm Jackie." And the woman blushed bright pink, apologized profusely, and hurried down the wine aisle, away from that particular me who she knew would remember this moment next time she ate dinner at my house or I at hers, since I had refused to use my flashy thing on her with wicked delight. So I began writing How to Survive the Apocalypse right after my other book came out. And yeah, long before the pandemic. So one of my favorite stories is my friend Jennifer and I had gone to see Margaret Atwood at Emory in Atlanta. And afterwards, and we're such fangirls, you know, we went up to her and go, hey, Miss Atwood, you know. And she had been a writer in residence at the University of Alabama. And we asked her, and we know that she actually finished Handmaid's Tale while she was at the University of Alabama. And so we asked her if being in Tuscaloosa had helped her finish that book. And she said, no. She said, I really had finished it before I got there. I was just kind of doing the final edits. She said, it didn't help me write it, but it corroborated it. So the pandemic didn't help me write this book, but it corroborated it. So I'm going to read you just a tiny bit of the introduction just to set up the book, and then I'm going to read some poems. Truth is, the world is always ending in one way or the other. I was born on a dark and stormy night, a cliched opening that was really the ending to something else. The story of a stern but repentant grandmother having tossed my pregnant mother out, and an uncle who, delayed by a bridge washed away in the weather, did not make it to the hospital before my new adoptive parents came to claim me. Paper signed, the end. New story. 4 years later, that adoptive mother died of breast cancer, another ending. A few years after that, my father married again and we moved from the farm to the city. And then he died too, leaving me with the third mother of my life, all before I was 7. And yet there I was in my own story, a child reading poetry, reading everything I could find, making things, clothes, doilies, paintings, music, dances, as fast as I could, using the force of my imagination to keep it all going. The end of the world kept coming, sudden, dramatic change, loss, the violation of the body, death of a boyfriend, death of another mother, of a friend. I had to create my way into survival and out of erasure. I had to outrun the horsemen in that damn blue Bible or be judged into annihilation. And yet, nothing is ever lost in the universe. It is merely transformed into something else, like spirituals, sorrow songs, the blues, or poetry. How many slave narratives are just survival tales on their way to better times? How many endings have been gathered into the squares of quilts, making something new and useful from the remnants of the old life? We create to keep living, to know we are still alive. Okay, so this book is divided into 2 sections. The first section is called One, and the second section is called, good job, yes. Boy, I was having a creative day that day. And there's an epigram to the first section, and it's, Lord, have mercy on this land of mine. We all gonna get it in due time. And of course, it is Nina Simone. Mississippi, goddamn, yes, thank you. And so the first poem of the book is called Plague. When it comes, as it always does, do as you are told. Abandon the schools and shops, the arenas and churches. Make a list. What can you live without? Carry only what you can carry into your bunker of a house. The stockpiles of toilet tissue and disinfectant lined up like children waiting to return from recess. If you have forgotten something, check your yard or kitchen cabinets. Remember, garlic treats the flu. Cinnamon can heal the gut. Dandelion is a medicinal miracle. Don't worry if the only face you have seen is your neighbor's peeking at you from her window, or if the quiet is so quiet, it sounds like prelude. If you are brave, walk out into the thirsty streets. Do not note the heaviness of the sky. Do not listen for locusts or hoofbeats. This is just another evening constitutional. Work if there is work. If not, meditate. Pretend your hunger is fasting. Listen, Israelite. You are lost in a manicured wilderness. You should rethink the necessity of touch. You should rethink necessity itself. So most of my poems come from my reaction to the world, because they are really me trying to make sense of the world, and usually to make sense of things that I just can't get my head wrapped around, things that keep me up at night. And so a lot of them come straight as responses to the news, to something that has happened. And so I'm just going to read a few. I think you will probably recognize where they have come from. This one is called, "Oh, Say, Can You See?" And it begins with a little epigram from the Star Spangled Banner, Francis Scott Key. No refuge could save the hireling enslaved from the terror of flight or the gloom of the grave. Those slaves at Fort McHenry never had a chance to kneel, probably dead before they hit the ground. Like that boy shot 20 times, his cell phone still smoking in his hand, his grandmother's backyard a burial ground, not sacred enough. Nor was his body a temple the cops dare not enter. Maybe if he had wrapped himself in stars and stripes, someone would have unholstered a hand, placed it on the heart, and begun to sing. Patriotic songs of the brave. Lift every voice. My soul looks back. Before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave. How many Black bodies must fall to hallow these urban battlefields? This is not a rhetorical question. I am asking for an exact body count. So I've been reading this poem a lot to readings, and I'm going to read it today. It's called The Laws of Insurrectionists. Remember always, the Second Amendment is prettier than the first. Shoot or beat if there are too many witnesses, any protesters engaged in public displays of freedom, if what is being protested is contrary to your own thinking or the internet. Wear feathers and skins as a sign that anything you can kill can also be revered in retrospect once it has been neutralized, assimilated, or removed to parts unknown. Call the cops on bird watchers, brown folks grilling hot dogs in public parks, and unwanted neighbors, just because this is still a free country and you can. Buy white vans and fertilizers, then blow everybody up. If someone shoots elementary school children out of jealousy or dresses as a superhero and assaults sitting patrons in the movies, comfort yourself. What did I tell you to always remember? Hate abortion, no matter what, period. Say blue lives, all lives, my life, our lives. He's got the whole world in his hands. I don't see color or whatever, but never say Black Lives Matter, lest you be thought a socialistic, unpatriotic, tree-hugging, America-hating fool. Don't be too intellectual. It's very unpatriotic and particularly unattractive in women. Champion at all cost public lynchings and executions, restrictive voting laws, the military and prisons. In fact, sacrifice everything, education, healthcare, your own kind, to build more prisons as fast as humanly possible. You must take responsibility for your family's safety. Discredit science in favor of quackery and gut feelings. Lean into your own understanding of whatever you do not understand. Do not let your children learn critical race theory. Pilgrims settled America. George Washington's teeth were wooden. Manifest Destiny was about God's will for America from sea to shining sea. Those people from Africa were immigrants, period. Clean your guns on Wednesday while listening to talk radio, and be sure to quote Martin Luther King Jr. to encourage nonviolence among those you might shoot. When the popularity of your narratives fails, or there are too many commercials with interracial couples, or you suspect that the playing field is scheduled to get leveled next Friday, riot, riot, riot. Build gallows for your own who fail to follow these laws at all times and in all ways, and think of yourself as a patriotic tourist while you do. Forget that patriotism is a form of love, the deep, abiding kind that bears its breast in a crowded bus station, makes 4 plaits on one head, lies counting the vagaries of a lover's breathing as a rosary, wears a mask, takes a bullet for kin and country, or loves one's neighbor as oneself. It is not that. Never, never that. Oh, okay. So I'm going to read one more in this section, just because this one was requested. Actually, I'm reading 2 more. I lied. So anyway, I don't know. I have a face that invites people to come up to me and say weird stuff. Crazy people and elderly men think I am the bomb. I'm just going to say. And so I'm not even going to tell you the story because it's too crazy, but I'm just going to read you the poem that resulted from it. I told you I have to make sense of the world by writing poems. So this is actually in response to a woman who came up to me and told me unsolicited her life story to convince me of something. I don't know. I didn't ask her any questions, whatever. It's called Allies. And the epigram is James Baldwin. I can't believe what you say because I see what you do. Thank you for letting me know you voted for the Black guy. You are sad when you think of segregation. You are angered by your family's attitude. You have boycotted businesses on my behalf. You never use that word. You disapprove of those who do. You protest Confederate monuments. You give to the NAACP. You have made many woke signs. You own tons of woke t-shirts. You never would have owned slaves. Your parents taught you to love everybody. Your father used to hire Black workers. Your mother marched with King. You loved your Black maid. Your Black maid loved you. Your favorite singer, actor, writer is Black. You never see color. You have 2 Black friends. Your boyfriend, husband, girlfriend, wife, baby mama, daddy is Black. Your child's best friend is biracial. You admire Oprah so much. You admire Beyonce so much. You admire hip hop so much. You love that MLK. You wish you had my skin. You wish you had my hair. You wish you were a strong Black woman. Somebody actually said that to me. It was a man, by the way. You have to have that sweet brown sugar. You had to tell your daddy he raped you. You have to keep peace with your neighbors. You have to keep peace at the office. You have to keep peace in your church. You have to stay true to your upbringing. You wish we would let it go. Your grandfather did not know any better when he grinned for the camera beneath the charred body. Okay, so I am going to read one more from this section and then a couple more poems. So I am a professor of American literature, and one of my subspecialties is African American literature. And so I'm always interested in history. And for me, history is not just a chronological series of events, but it is present. You know, well, we're standing in Mississippi, of the land of the great William Faulkner. And I don't think it's true for Southerners that, you know, the past is not even past. I think the past is always with us in the present moment. And so I'm always looking for connections to things. So I used to fight with people on Facebook and social media. I've learned better now. I don't waste my time. I just go off and write poems. So a friend of mine from college posted on Facebook and says, I don't understand these people, why these people are burning down things. So I wrote this poem. This is why people burning down fast food joints and whatnot. And it begins with an epigram, and it comes from, the catechism to be taught orally to those who cannot read, designed especially for the instruction of the slaves. And this was a document put out by the Protestant Episcopal Church in the Confederate States. Question, how do others sin against you? Answer, by cursing me, telling lies about me, or striking me. Question, what must you do to those who thus sin against you? Answer, I must forgive them. See, I learned my catechism well. Learned to offer my cloak and coat, my cheek again and again as the skin was splayed from my body. I can quote Martin Luther King Jr. with ease, praise the Americana of his martyrdom, the sweet, unselfish beauty of that bullet's velocity. Shall I sing, we shall overcome while I swing? I have wanted so long to believe in justice, to think of each blow as recompense for my wickedness. How can I continue? How can I continue? How can I continue to take and eat this image of myself, choke on the eloquence of my dissent, speak love fluently to someone with his knee on my neck, his bullet in my child? So the second section of this is called Two, and the epigram is from Jeremiah. If I say I will not mention him or speak anymore in his name, his message becomes a fire burning in my heart, shut up in my bones, and I become weary of holding it in, and I cannot prevail. And for me, the act of writing is like a fire shut up in my bones. And so it has to come out. And I'm going to read you just a little bit from the little micro essay or prose poem called "The Fire Shut Up in My Bones" about my great grandmother Sadie, who was a French woman who was kind of snatched up with a group of enslaved people, and it made her so mad she said, "Forget it," and married an enslaved man and went on with her life. Once great-grandmother Sadie said, "The children were hungry. We were all hungry. So I took 2 small pigs from Master's sty, killed and dressed them. One I fed to his family, and the other I fed to mine. He never knew it." "But," her grandchildren asked, "wasn't that stealing? Haven't you said we must never steal?" Sadie would laugh and say, "Stealing? That's not stealing. That's we labor." Sadie recognized what her grandchildren did not, that her free labor was valuable, that she was valuable, and that even though she was an enslaved woman, her worth did not depend on the estimation of those with legal power over her. Her agency also extended to the community. She shared her payment for her labor, for we labor. That expression came to be used in our family to acknowledge boldness and self-appreciation. Do you see how we survived? By wit and turpentine. And that story is just the tip of it. I have noted that, did you wonder about us, dear sister? Did you think of us, dear brother? Or did you get so used to walking about without your arm or leg that you have stopped noticing it was gone? I have noticed your absence and have had to fill it with invention and imagination. I have to will myself whole, not severed, not fragmented, but whole. And to do this, I have leaned into the fire raging in my bones. Truth is, a fire I cannot contain. It has to burst out, to be born, to find its own creative joy. This is how I have survived in this land that wants to chew me down, sinews and all, then spit out my bones. This is how I have learned to speak the fire of we labor. So I'm going to read just a couple of poems, short poems from this, and then my final poem, and open it up for questions. So Honore Fanon Jeffers is a wonderful poet, and she was in Montgomery on a writer's retreat. And I said to her on the hottest day of the summer, "Let's go look at plantations." And she said, I said, come on. So we went. And we went to this plantation in Demopolis, Alabama. And you could tell this little tour guide had been trained to try to be inclusive. And so she said to us as we were standing in this plantation house, she says, "Aren't you glad your ancestors got to build this fine plantation?" You heard what I said. And have you ever had anybody say something to you that's just so beyond what you could ever imagine anyone saying to you that you just sort of stand there going, huh? So this is the poem that came from that. And it's called The Tour Guide, because what else could I call it? The tour guide wonders if we are proud our ancestors got to build this plantation, Demopolis, Alabama, 2019. When she asked, her eyes pale with hard scrabble life, her history of ingenious men stuck on replay, this big house, her heritage, had not poverty been insidious and colorblind. I saw her, a child again, passing the ruthless columns on her way to school, a cotton sack dress, hungry for verandas. Even as words hung silent on our lips, our heads beating back and forth with no. So the last time I was here, I read a revenge poem, and I'm still writing those. Here's a revenge poem. It's called Poem for My Neighbor, whose good intentions are wolf pelt. This carpetbagging, gentrifying Aryan mother's son cut through our neighborhood buying houses, called himself a community developer, clipped all the live edges in liberty neat and bound for himself and his posterity. Declaration of Independence just doing what it do. And he was pursuing that happiness all right, as if it were being stolen, or Massa, they is running away down the street with him after in full stride. Boy, could he smile, unhinge that jaw, clip it to his ears, wide and sparkly and toothy as an old toothpaste commercial, to buy and sell all abandoned buildings and occupied ones too. Some folks who knew better could not some folks who knew better could not fly fast enough to miss the buzzsaw of his charm or his sign on dotted line readiness that left them standing outside their generational house admiring a stranger's yard, boxes of their shit still stacked on the sidewalk. And then he painted his own house alt white, and even black neighbors followed suit, mouthing something about pure lines and look, as if good intentions could emerge from a paint can. We all know there is fur beneath the closest of shaves. Wolf comes uninvited as 5 o'clock shadow, and even lambs sacrificing both wool and meat for somebody's pretty cudgel have eyes to see the coming nick and slaughter. At least I know very well I do, fucker. Okay, so I'm going to read one more from this one, and it's called How to Make Neck Bones and Rice. How to make neck bones and rice. Get a pot, not Cuisinart. Something deep and well seasoned, passed down through generations, a sacred artifact of hands, too scratched and bowed for all the bits to wash away. Put in the meat, full of fat and bone. The shy meat is the meaning of life, there to be rooted out, earned by a tenacious tongue. Add salt and pepper, chopped onion, whatever you got, and seasoning. Water to make the sauce, water to stretch the broth. Forget all you have learned. Recipe, saute, braise. These do not belong here. Just touch, smell, remembered places. Put your foot in that pot, then cook until the bones give up the ghost, until holiness floats through the house and out the door. Everybody will know your business and envy. Most people throw the rice into the boiling liquid. Cook it on the side if you want to put on airs. Your nose and eyes will tell when it's ready for the plate. This is all you need for glory. Grain and bone, hot water cornbread, the flavor of making do, the altar of your table. Okay, so I'm going to end with a new poem. And my daughter is a lawyer in Memphis, and she was on Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, of course she was, at a light when a car zipped around her and sort of made a U facing her in the intersection and began shooting at a car of people behind her. And she was caught there with nowhere to go. And so she finally just made a crazy turn, around and got out of the way and hid behind a building within her car. The people in the building, kind of when the bullets kind of stopped a little bit, motioned her to come in. And as she got out of the car to go in, the shooting started again and they locked the door and she had to jump back into her car. And as a mother, I am in a constant state of panic and worry, given all that is happening in our country at this moment. People being shot at grocery stores and walking down the street and in the middle of Memphis at 12 noon. And so I wrote this poem when my daughter called and told me that, because I connected it to the morning my father died. And so here it is. It's called, and I'll end with this, I Hear America Singing the Blues. 3 birds, their fat bodies mangoes among the winter branches, belted blues outside my house the morning my father died. Nobody foretold it, not even the doctor, though the old folks would later claim the birds as sign. 3 a.m., pitch black January, a song loud and full-throated, troubling the Alabama morning. And my father, not knowing his heart would quit that day, filled his thermos with coffee, put on pressed pants, starched shirt, shoes polished to sparkle, while my mother sang When Sunny Gets Blue with Johnny Mathis on the clock radio. I was dreaming of red bell bottoms and new white kids, throwing my legs out as I leaned back on a blue swing. My ponytails, a tandem of happiness, red bows tied just so. Again and again, I flung my body against the air, kicked, hovered like a held note, like the momentary stillness before the hawk dives and murders its startled prey. Then, and only then, would I launch, as only a child can launch, my whole body and heart unafraid of landing or the blues of hard ground that always comes one day. My father kissed me minutes before his body wedged itself between tub and toilet, before my mother, a singing bird, heard the song his body made as it hit the floor. His name became a question repeating, so loud it stopped me mid-swing, so loud the bird stopped to listen as she called and called in the silence of his departing soul. The morning my father died, Martin Luther King Jr. was 39, and Lyndon Johnson slept uneasy. Bessie Smith, long dead, was singing in their heads. Nobody knows you when you're down and out, she sang to the drowning men, to a whole nation underwater, on fire, on the precipice of new tunes. Where were the blues going? Outside war, on poverty, in the streets, and Vietnam, where the jungle bristled with singing birds. My cousin was fighting there, the one my father raised as son, the one who later gave me a pearl ring, told me the story of Okinawan divers, had a wife, daughter, and good times. One day that cousin would steal from me for a fix. The shambles of his life shuffled like a losing hand, like a story only the blues can tell. I saw him for the last time, stranger and relative, hands shoved in his pockets, prison style, walking down the street. I watched him, his name uncalled, until he disappeared beyond the tree line into memory. Maybe he died the next day. Maybe he went to rehab. Maybe he is alive and well and diving for pearls. Pearls more delicate than bullets that whizzed past my daughter's car as she waited for the light to turn. But where was she to turn, assaulted by flying pearls, caught in a war between two cars of young men set on the blues? She feared the song her body might make, the sound of her mother's song, a whole nation of mothers, a hallelujah chorus of Ma Rainey, their throats raw, the color of red bell bottoms. Lord, going to sleep now. Just now I got bad news to try to dream away my troubles, counting these blues. Ma Rainey, tell us your dream now. What will our future be? We're stuck in these blues, Ma Rainey. Can't do nothing but wait and see. 4 months after my father died, Mahalia told the Lord to take King's hand. He was tired, weary, and plumb worn out. The thud of his body hitting the balcony, the repetition of these themes. Second line keeps playing, blues replicating like rifle shots. The grocery, the school, the mosque, the church. I am black and blue with singing, the synagogue, in the street, everywhere, 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 bodies falling like soldiers in the jungle, like children hurling themselves off swings, indifferent to the ground, or birds that bellow the blues, loud and raw-throated, full of lament and portend. And we go on as if the world is not primed for destruction, as if each day is as ordinary as the morning my father got up, put on his clothes, reached for his cigarettes, and died there on the bathroom floor while my mother sang with Johnny Mathis, "Love is gone, so what does it matter?" And I dreamed of summer. Thank you so much. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, so the archivist in me is really curious about how your poems are interacting with documents like the Catechism of the Enslaved, and then even your own family history and some of the things you relate. And would you be willing to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So there's a section in the book that's called that's like a biography of a woman. Her name is Lillian Brewster Dungy. She was a real woman, born in 1868. She's was my mother's husband's mother. So she's my mother's mother-in-law. My mother's husband died and she married my father. And so I actually received a commission during the bicentennial from the state of Alabama to write a series of poems and did a lot of work on her life. But what's really interesting about that is it's very hard to find it was very hard to find archival information about her, even though there's a plaque to her at the Department of Youth Services. I found some information that was totally inaccurate and it was really interesting. And so one of the things I talk about in that little prose poem and about the story of her life, a lot of the information I have, I got from my mother and from, I grew up in her house. From her house and her artifacts. And what I realized in writing this and in playing with those documents and other documents is that there are so many gaps. You know, one of the things I say is history doesn't tell me what I need to know. There's so much that history doesn't tell me. And so having to sort of fill in some of those gaps with imagination. But I love documents because, you know, my degree is a PhD. And so I am by training a researcher. So I like to look things up and I go down these rabbit holes, I love the internet age because people have scanned books that you used to have to go to distant archives for and get all kind of permissions to see, but now you can just see them in your own home. And I think, boy, oh boy, if I had had this 30 years ago, 40 years ago, I'd be queen of the research world now. But no. So yeah, I think they play an important part in my life. They spur my imagination. I always try to imagine what was her life actually like from day to day. And what I include in my poems and what I include when I write about people like that, that's based on archival research, is lots of questions. Because I think, that's the researcher's job, is to ask a lot of questions and never be satisfied sort of with the answer. So I think, I don't know if that answered your question. I don't know where I went, but yeah, I love documents. And I like to, when I teach anything in American literature in particular, I like to bring out documents to show the students. Hey.
I'm actually standing up because we're running a little behind and we have the Ephemera Prize. So let's give Jacqueline and Trimble one more. Thank you, Jackie, and thank you, everyone. We have 5 more readers, but they'll have short readings. We have the Ephemera Prize of high school writers that we've been offering for the last quite a number of years. And Jackie Trimble and Chantal James were the 2 judges of this year's prize. They told me they had a heck of a time deciding, not that there weren't good pieces submitted, but that there were so many. They had a long list, and then they had to sit down together and compare notes, and they came up with our 5 prize winners, who will all receive a $200 prize and the opportunity to read this afternoon. If you'll give me just half a second, I'm going to cycle over the tech just a little bit, because one of our winners is down in Brookhaven from the Mississippi School for the Arts. So we're going to try to bring Elliot in just a second. While the projector is warming up, besides our 5 prize winners, there are 3 honorable mentions. Marianne Dang from MSMS with A Stir Fry of Tradition. Is Marianne here? You want to come up in? Just to receive your honorable mention. The next honorable mention is Erin Erter for the story September 2, 1963. And if my memory serves, she's also at MSA. And then Joseph Hanna for the story There Is No Town Named Charlesville. I'm going to go slightly out of alphabetical order. And hopefully, if Elliot is still there, and if I can find the right one in their alphabetical order, here we are. Yes. Our first prize winner of the afternoon is Elliot Nix for the poem Inhospitable Towns. Elliot, if you'll give me just half a second to put you on the Zoom. Go ahead, Elliot.
Is the audio quality acceptable?
Yes, good.
Okay. This is my poem titled Inhospitable Hometowns. My youth was filled with small town talk. The brunt of it, trials and tribulations of average country folk magnified into end-all dynasty-like struggles by the ever-running mouth of someone too volatile to settle into their life and too scared to change it. If it rained, it was never enough. Whether it was too much for tomatoes or too little for lima beans, there was always something wrong with the weather and never with the farm. Town gossip was served like syrup at breakfast. If a cousin had a cheating husband, or an aunt had a son who turned out queer, or God forbid there was a grandchild who left the church, it was the first thing I heard in the morning and the last thing I heard at night. If I went anywhere with anyone who shared my blood, it was sheer certainty that I would hear the deepest, darkest, most deplorable secrets of every convenience clerk, cashier, and bank teller we encountered. It was simply the small town pastor. But every now and then, on a cool day in late September, when the sun would hit the dewdrops on the hayfield just right, provide a view that seemed just for me, I would relish in the peace of small town heaven that I'm certain was the chief point of reason for those who defended living in the belt of pine. I grew out of the phase of life where running barefoot through hayfields is admirable, and into the portion of my youth where it was admonished. I grew to despise the populace that detested me and to only appreciate that which I could see through screens, what was far enough outside the reach of falling pine needles to be untouched, untainted, and opinionless. It was then that I learned the lousiest lesson within county lines. The glamour of small towns is a thing that is burned away the higher the sun gets. In the heat of the day, the angry swirls of reality spiraled up, the town's true colors bleeding through its very foundations, teeming and twirling off the asphalt in an undeniable exclamation. This place does not welcome you. I later learned that message was meant for me more than most. Friday nights rolled around, and by then I was too old to join in the small-scale side game of football next to the field, and thus was relegated to walking the poorly paved track around it with fellow teenagers, none of which were sure we were. We did, however, all rest firmly in one truth. For one reason or another, we were not meant to be. We saw it in the color of our skin, in the baleful glare of an old man with hatred tattooed on his heart and a clump of tobacco permanently tucked away in his judgmental. We saw it in the desire of our love, in the offensive leer of a woman with unnaturally blonde hair and an accusation of inhumanity on her tongue the second she saw us so much as hold hands. We saw it in the viewpoints of our parents, in the apathetic, antagonistic responses to our words, to our actions, to even our breaths, even and especially in the attempts to coax us out of our rooms that followed. We saw it in the faces of our families, in the weathered, beaten down, beaten up faces of those who had clung tenaciously, hospital-banded wrists clinging to the small town, even when it force-fed them addicting distractions, one after another. We were dead set on leaving this place. We'd made the plans, we'd done the work, securing asylum in any way we could, collegiate halls, military bunks, guest rooms of distant cousins. But when we were ready to leave, one foot outside county lines for the first real time in all our young yet immeasurable lives, we hesitated. Looking back, we saw ourselves, small, childish renditions, youth running in colorless trails down our nose through ever-present dirt, a now outgrown response to the pine tree pollen most of us would never weather again. They looked at us, these childhood renditions, and they smiled the knowing, mischievous, good yet bad intended smile of Southern youth as they extended skinny arms to wave us a goodbye. Nothing but joy on their small, haggard faces. And it was okay. We all knew, young and old, that we would leave today. But there was no need for sorrow, because as certain as small towns stay small, those who leave them behind will always return when their child's goodbye has turned to nostalgia, when they grow brave enough to make a home in an inhospitable hometown. Thank you.
Thank you, Elliot. Incidentally, all the prize winners and honorable mentions will be published online in an anthology of the Ephemera Prize. It's ready to go. Hopefully we'll get it online early next week. Our next prize winner is Mackenzie Brannon for the poem The Side of the Road in Columbus, Mississippi.
Hi, I'll just get into it. The Side of the Road in Columbus, Mississippi. The current tugs at massive lily pads. Delicate pink flowers tower above. Between the sacred lotus are hundreds of vibrant green plants that bloom in bowl-like bursts, edges like wilting flowers. The last rays from the setting sun desperately reach out. Swampy water takes hold, and the lake's ripples begin to shimmer. The sky fades pink, and I swat at mosquitoes. Trees admire themselves in the water. The reflection vanishes, the scorching heat transforms into a warm hug. I skip a stone away from the lively stirs beneath the water. Then I carefully get back into my car and drive past the Do Not Park sign.
Our third apprentice, and these are not first, second, third, but the third person we're hearing from as Ephemera Prize winner will be Chloe Dobbins for the story A Day No Fish Would Die.
A day no fish would die. This is where I used to play when I was your age. Dad stood in front of the pines, looking over his shoulder into the woods so thick light hardly reached through. I knew far beyond the pines was a bayou, still green water occasionally disturbed by a floating American alligator or a feral Mississippi father. I had been there once before when I was 5 years old. I still remember the sand spurs pricking at my heels and the mosquitoes chewing on my arms as we made our way through thick blackberry brambles and pine trees to the bayou. The summer sun seared us as we trekked through the thicket, but the true agony only began when we reached the swampy stream. I spent most of the fishing trip clutching the edge of the tottering little boat, trembling as I spotted more moccasins and alligators than bass and bluegills. Dad would beam bright as a child as he plunged the oar into the inky mud, pushing us off into water too murky to see our own feet in. By the time we were ready to release all the creatures we, or he, had caught, I was waterlogged, wailing, and way beyond any chance of ever wanting to return. I don't want to go fishing, I repeated for the third time that afternoon. Dad just pulled a bush to the side, unflinching despite its prickly leaves, a silent order to abandon the grassy clearing and march into wilderness. Raising my head, I could see exactly where the sun disappeared from the sky, a side effect of the pines stretching up and up and up. Letting my gaze droop down, I saw slender beams of light pierce through the woods, occasionally offering a small refuge from the shadows cast by the trees. I faintly heard the steady rhythm of a stream flowing further into the forest. I turned around, trying to meet Mom's gaze. She and my little sister sat eating lunch with my uncle on the porch, sheltered in the shade. All parties had declined the invitation to go fishing, so Dad settled on hauling only me down with them. Mom finally looked up from her conversation to find me staring at her. She seemed to mistake my cry for help for a look of excitement and offered me a cheery smile. My final lifeline severed, I raised my foot and ventured into the world beyond. Gone was a cloudless sky and freshly cut grass. All I could hear or see or smell was pine. Pine trees stalking over me, pine needles crunching under my boots, pine wafting in the breeze. After a few more seconds, I was at last able to register other sensations again. I could hear a woodpecker droning into a poor tree somewhere, as well as the buzzing of mosquitoes flying around me. Worst of all, I could hear the incessant chirping of the crickets in the bait jar. I grimaced, ill at the memory of having to impale the insects on a fish hook. Soon, I heard my father's heavy footsteps behind me. Ready to go? I let the question dissolve into the air and get carried off by the piney breeze, thinking I obviously would never be ready to go. I decided to ask a question of my own. Do you think fishing for fun is okay? I turned to Dad, my voice raised just enough to be heard over the woodpecker and the mosquitoes and the crickets. I mean, morally. Dad trotted up to my side. As long as you release them, yes. Catching them and keeping them is wrong if you ain't gonna eat them. I thought about that for a moment as we walked a few more steps into the woods. I imagined being a fish, floating peacefully down the stream with my fish friends, and finding a nice snack only for my lips to be skewered on a hook. But doesn't it hurt them? No, they don't have as many nerves in their mouth as us. Oh. Dad held a machete in one hand and 2 fishing rods in the other. He had donned a dull red flannel, thick blue jeans, and heavy work boots for the excursion. His clothes and tools reminded me of the hillbilly caricatures I saw on TV sometimes. This provincial side of him mostly unfamiliar to those outside the family. Sometimes I had trouble reconciling the man I saw as my father and the man everyone else in town saw as the same person. I knew he was a lawyer, and I knew what lawyers were, but I found it difficult to imagine him in a suit arguing in a courtroom when he looked like this. Then again, Dad didn't usually hunt or fish like most of my classmates' fathers seemed to love to do, and when he did, he never cared to show off his bounty. I had a slight suspicion the differences between him and most people in town didn't stop at their hunting habits, recalling the arguments he'd had with my grandparents before. I wondered if he ever felt like an outsider in his own hometown. He certainly wouldn't be the only one. Yet he clearly fit in with the rural world much more than me, I thought, as I winced at the sharp prod of a branch in my side, and he didn't do so much as blink when he scraped his arm along a thorny bush. We marched on in relative silence for the rest of the trek, the only sound coming from us, the crunch of leaves underneath our boots. As we continued deeper into the wilderness, the pine trees and needles were replaced by cypresses and Spanish moss. We had arrived at the bayou. A thought dawned on me as I gazed at the ever-broadening green river. We didn't bring a boat. Don't need one. Dad shrugged and gestured to a piece of land further down to our right. Right over there, the ground's solid enough for us to stand, and the water's deep enough to fish. I tiptoed my way down, doing my best to avoid soggy dirt and puddles. Dad didn't seem to care about getting his shoes or jeans dirty. He marched straight to the plot he had pointed out. While Dad unpacked our equipment, I leered at the foggy water. Not much seemed to have changed since I was last there. The water was the same shade of muddy green. If I squinted hard enough, I thought I might have been able to see little tadpoles near the surface, perhaps descendants of the same frogs I'd spotted hopping around years before. The same mangroves ambled into the water, the same coarse Spanish moss dripping off their branches. And Dad turned to hand me the same old fishing rod I'd been using since the first time I was forced into the water. I cringed as he took out the bait jar and held out a cricket, gesturing for me to take the insect. Gritting my teeth, I shook my head. Will you do it? Dad scowled. My daughter's too scared to kill a damn cricket, he grumbled, but still skewered the creature on the fish hook for me. I cast the line out into the swamp, tiny ringlets rippling in the water from the disturbance. I expected Dad to follow, but instead he pulled out a box of cigarettes. I frowned at the carton. Papa said smoke scares the fish. I didn't care about the fish. Dad shrugged and lit one of the cigarettes. He's not here. I ignored the acrid smoke crowding my nose and throat and focused on the red bobber floating on the lazy creek. This was the worst part, the waiting. Nothing to do but let the sun fry you up while you stare down at the line. I looked over at Dad. He was leaning against a drooping tree, dangling his cigarette from his mouth. Do you actually like fishing? I finally asked him. All you've done so far is smoke. Dad exhaled a gray cloud before responding. I like to fish well enough. I just needed a minute. True to his word, Dad extinguished the little flame and threw his cigarette butt into a trash bag we had brought before taking his own rod. When I was little, fishing was about all we had to do for fun. Dad was fiddling around with his hook, piercing the bait on it. The TV only had a couple channels on it, and we only watched on Saturday. Your generation's pretty lucky, you know. A lot's changed since I was your age. I readied myself for a kids these days speech, but it didn't come. Dad was looking out at the water. Right over there is where we always took the boat out. He gestured at a tall cypress creeping into the water. If I thought hard enough, I could imagine Dad when he was my age, sitting in the same place I am now, much taller and thinner and stronger than me, and a lot tanner too. He would have been grinning, I think. He had to have enjoyed it far more than I was. One time when I was 16, I drove to the woods by myself to go fishing. Dad cast out his line beside me. Accidentally left the radio on. Jeremy was playing. A lady from church heard it when she drove by, and she snitched on me to my dad. I think she invited me to a CD burning later that year. I met Dad's eyes in surprise. She tried to get you in trouble for a song, and is a CD burning what it sounds like? Exactly what it sounds like. Back in the day, church folks would get together and burn music they didn't like. I think Momo may have said something about that. She doesn't really care for Pearl Jam. Dad laughed. Come to think of it, I'm pretty sure I was the first person in the county to listen to grunge. A lot of folks didn't like me much for it. Maybe Dad overestimated how much had changed in town since he was my age. I was still too scared to admit I listened to punk when my classmates humiliated another student for wearing a Guns of Brixton shirt. Sorry, the papers are a bit out of order. The papers are very out of order. There we go. Sorry. Dad spoke again. I always told myself back then I would leave here when I grew up, move out to Seattle or somewhere around there. Why didn't you? I tried, kept having to come back, and eventually I just gave up. Dad's gaze was fixed on the water. This whole town's cursed, I'm telling you. But it all worked out okay. Not many cities you can get a place like this a couple minutes from your backyard. Before I decided whether I agreed or not, Dad dropped his rod and stretched. You ever heard Crown of Thorns? Talking about Pearl Jam made me think of it. I shook my head as Dad reached for one of our bags. To my surprise, he pulled out his phone. Well, you're about to. Won't it scare the fish? I was already tossing my own rod to the side. Forget the fish. Mother Love Bone is more important. Dad pressed play, and soft guitar began to echo across the bayou. Coated in sweat and swamp, we crouched together under a cypress and proceeded to scare off all the fish that dared to approach our moss-smeared sanctuary that day. Thank you.
And our next prize winner is Nathan George for the essay Dirty.
I titled this piece Dirty. Why is everything so dirty? You need to clean it now. I remember her frequent command as I carefully wiped the clay and freshly cut grass off her tombstone. My mom, my only parent, died a year and 2 months ago, yet the dirt that covers her refuses to host grass, a reminder of the pain in my heart. Every visit, I carefully perfect her plot, pulling up the wild grass, straightening the flower vases, and polishing her perfect smile, as everything imperfect is so dirty. Living in rural Mississippi as an effeminate boy, I felt dirty my entire childhood. In kindergarten, I ran down the long gravel driveway after a 30-minute bus ride, my lunchbox and backpack swinging erratically like a typical 6-year-old. However, tears poured down my face. I ran into my mother's arms, interrupting the pot of green beans and mashed potatoes on the stove top, and mumbled the words any Southern parent dreads to hear. They called me gay. Gay, the dirtiest word I have known since childhood. Nanan, my name for my mother, turned the stovetop off with one of her aging hands, took my hand with the other, and guided me to our safe space, her room. She laid me down softly in her oak king bed, the aroma of cigarettes and her arthritic fingers running through my hair, fighting away my tears. Despite the efforts to fix myself and my mother being there to clean me, I knew I was dirty. Everyone reminded me I was dirty. In 8th grade, I walked into school and everyone shared a picture of me in a crop top. No one approached me. Both teachers and students just laughed and mocked me while I cried. After this, I worked hard to clean myself. Every quarter, I would see my mother's yellow and gappy smile from years of smoking displayed full effect as she stared at my grades. A's. I relished in these moments. I wanted these moments. I needed these moments. However, attending a school in a rural town with a class size of 45, no honors or AP courses, no extracurriculars outside of sports, unqualified coaches teaching math and history, and students destined to attend community college and live in their hometown forever, I knew I had to accomplish more. Notebooks filled with advanced math formulas, ACT prep books filled with notes, and devices filled with Khan Academy videos began to take over my room. The culmination of my cleaning grew freshman year of high school when I learned of the Mississippi School for Mathematics and Science, MSMS, a residential high school for Mississippi's academically gifted juniors and seniors. The day I learned about MSMS, I ran home mirroring the younger me's emotions, but with a smile. However, the usual smell of cornbread and green beans was not there to greet me at the front door. I ran confused yet overjoyed to my mother's room, finding her bent over her bed, sobbing. She said the 3 words that changed my life forever. I have cancer. I held her tight in my arms, caressing her prideful air that would soon disappear, continuing to wipe away her tears. 2 weeks later, the pandemic started and our final chapter began together. For the next 17 months, the sound of an alarm pierced my ears every morning at 5:30 a.m. I brewed a pot of Folgers coffee and made a cup with 2 scoops of sugar and a dash of creamer to wake my mother. We began our 40-minute journey to her cancer treatment, sipping caramel frappes along the way. During one of these rides, she admitted something neither of us wanted to hear. Nathan, one day I won't be here. I sadly knew this, and I watched over the next year and a half as our health roller coastered up and down, with me there to help her up and down. In the blink of an eye, I was letting her down one last time into the one thing she hated the most, dirt. 2 weeks later, I took my first step on MSMS campus, beginning my 2-year journey to success. My junior year became the first time I had to work for my grades. I spent my nights reading the AP Bio textbook, calculating derivatives for hours for AP Calculus, researching and writing research papers for history, English, and engineering, and speaking Spanish in the mirror. However, MSMS allowed me to develop and pursue my interests. I filmed and edited videos for MSMS's YouTube channel, learned to play piano, performed vocally, led financial seminars, and became happy. Every other Sunday, I relayed my time at MSMS to my mom while I wiped the dirt off her grave with a rag and tears, ensuring we aren't dirty.
Thank you, Nathan. Our final Ephemera Prize winner for this afternoon is Ava Grace Noe for the essay, Dead Chickens in the Fence.
Hi, this is my piece, Dead Chickens in the Fence. And yeah, okay. I'm not sure if I started counting the bodies at all, but if I did, I've forgotten the number by now. I didn't even know where to put them all. Where do you lay your dead when there will be no graves? Where do you lay your dead when their lives are so insignificant that they don't deserve graves in the world's eyes? You lay them by the fire pit. The ride home was everything I needed that day, with the top off the Jeep, riding 70 on Highway 9W. I had the radio turned up so high that the trees were shaking and swaying to the tune of Carrie Underwood. Work wasn't great. It never was. I worked hard every day to make sure that people could have a better life, but it seemed like they didn't give a damn about helping themselves. As I drove away that day, my thoughts began to circle back to that place, because there was nothing special about that red brick building right off Business Drive. The name itself just elaborates on the monotony of the environment. Everyone there would smile at you, but as soon as the client left the room, the smiles vanished. It was like a museum with all our stone cold hearts and plastic faces. Today, together, we would spit out our ugly remarks about the condition about these people's lives as if we were any better. But I don't think we meant the things we said about those people. I think we just hated the paperwork piling up on our desks and the droning phone calls, the fears that being a files clerk was all we would ever amount to. And then I thought it paid the bills, and that's all you could need. Enough life to get you up every morning and go to work, and to earn enough money to enjoy life when you weren't in that godforsaken building. And I knew when I got home, there would be a cat around my ankles as I fed the chickens in my backyard. I would be living in my element. That's all I could ask for. So I thought, with my Ray-Bans perched on my nose and my hair far past tangled flowing behind me, I would let the roar of my engine and the energy of that moment carry away my troubles. The piercing wind cut away all my rough edges and just gave me enough space to breathe. But I could almost still hear in the back of my head someone talking about an insurance policy or how the payroll didn't compare to what we could have been making. I turned up the radio. I should have known from that moment that my world was ending. This universe works in balance, and that day was no exception. There never was an exception. Even for just a second to breathe, you must pay your dues to the stars that spin and spindle away our fates. When I finally made it to the driveway with its broken gravel and the mailbox nearly on its side, I saw the neighbor boy in the distance with his ankles in the pond. Those waters weren't safe for a grown adult, let alone a kid. The water came up to my mid-calf, but that was enough room for things to grow. Sickly green algae caught in your toes with sulking, scaly things slithering around your ankles. One bite and you would be gone, but move too quick to run and then the snakes would know where to attack. We told that kid to keep a knife or something with him just in case something was to happen, even if it was only grass snakes. God, he should know better for as much as out near that pond. That's just one step in the wrong spot away from a lawsuit for us if he was to get hurt. And there was that dog of his yipping away at his ankles. That dog in my yard. The last time he was back there, I couldn't turn the ignition off fast enough. I've been talking to God a lot more lately. Being outside with my garden and my land, it's honest work. It brings you closer to who created it. I ask him for forgiveness. I know I'm not the best woman or the best mother, but I try. I try so hard to be everything I'm supposed to be and not to fall short. God has given me so much in my life and I had to be grateful. I had to understand his plan. But as I slammed the door of the Jeep and I ran to the coop in the backyard, I was screaming, pleading to him to have mercy on them and to have mercy on me. There were so many feathers. I only let one group out a day is to not mix them up. I'd left that broody hen in with her newly hatched chicks that day. And as I entered the backyard, I could hear her squawking as she ran around the inside of her coop, no longer as broody as she was this morning. She was terrified and so was I. I didn't know what to do. The shotgun was inside, but I couldn't bring myself to go get it. The danger had passed. The church had burnt to embers. The streets painted red. I just started walking into the grass, looking for something, anything to show me someone had lived. I think I found a black copper Moran first. She was leaning against the shop door, and you wouldn't have known she was dead, just sleeping. Her black feathers shine purple and green, and her simple wings tucked back as if she was at peace. I bent down slowly to see if there was any way I could save her, and as I lifted her in the air, her neck fell backwards, limp in my hands. Please, I begged God, please. And when I looked in her eyes, praying there would be something, anything, they were fading slowly into the darkness of the night. Her eyes now were a glossy gray as her beak bobbed, grasping for air. There was no blood. There never was. Her neck had been snapped. That dog had been killing for sport. I held her to my chest, rocking the lifeless body back and forth. I found them roosted in the trees, littering the field and the cow pasture next door. These chickens, my chickens with death in their eyes. You would never think it was so easy to get attached to livestock, but they become a part of your family. By the time I made it around the yard, they had all begun to go stiff, their legs sticking up in the air and their toes pointed like claws. They were telling me I didn't protect them. They were whispering in my ears. They weren't wrong. I should have been there to save them. With chicken feet in each of my hands, I tried not to look down. I couldn't stand to look at their faces. I began to set them in rows of two by the fire pit in the backyard. That used to be a place of celebration and good times. You could open a beer and sit together as the sun faded away and the moon began its midnight dance with the stars. Now it was a final resting place. When I laid down that night to sleep, my husband gone for work, I cried. I didn't understand and I still don't. Chicken bones clattered together in their own sweet, sick melody. I thought about what to do next with my empty coop and a broken heart. Now I keep the shotgun leaning against the shop door. I'm always prepared for the worst, no matter how bright the sun is. But that old shotgun, I don't have to worry about it rusting. They say when you grow something for someone you love, it won't ever die. They always forget to mention when something grows from hate, it cuts and tears like the brambles around the fence. No matter how much you cut at them, they only grow back tougher. It's all they know how to do. Thank you.
Thank you to our 5 Ephemera Prize readers and winners, and to the honorable mentions, and to all the 51 students who sent in submissions to the contest this year. We look forward to hearing from more of you again next year, unless you're graduating, and then good luck in all your further endeavors. Thank you all for coming this afternoon. And if you were here this morning, also this morning, tomorrow morning, you can sleep in an extra half hour. We'll begin at 9:30 a.m. right back here with 4 more excellent readers, starting with our Eudora Welty Prize winner, Exposing Mississippi. Thank you very much.